The divorce papers were already on the table when Rachel Morgan said the one thing nobody had said in 8 months. Your wife never left because she was afraid of you. My pen stopped half an inch above the signature line. The conference room suddenly felt too small, too quiet. Rachel stood in the doorway holding a silver flash drive between two fingers. Not a folder, not a stack of documents, just a flash drive. The kind of thing that could hold 1,000 lies. Or one truth. You shouldn't be here, I said. Probably not. The lawyer across from me leaned back in his chair. Rachel didn't move. Neither did I. For 8 months, everyone had been telling me the same story. I was controlling, possessive, unable to let go. Every attempt I made to defend myself somehow became proof against me. Every explanation sounded like an excuse. Every apology sounded like an admission. And eventually, I got tired. Tired enough to sign. Tired enough to let everyone keep their version. Rachel placed the flash drive on the table. A small metallic click echoed through the room. What's on it? She swallowed. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked nervous. Something Olivia never wanted you to hear. I stared at the device. The room waited. The lawyer waited. Rachel waited. Then, she said something that changed the direction of my life before I ever opened the file. I should have given this to you months ago. Nobody spoke. Outside the window, traffic moved through downtown Chicago as if nothing important was happening. But something was. Because for the first time in nearly a year, someone wasn't asking me to explain myself. Someone was asking me to listen. And I had no idea that the voice waiting inside that flash drive would destroy the story everyone believed. Your wife never left because she was afraid of you. The sentence landed harder than any accusation I'd heard in the last 8 months. My hand stayed above the divorce papers. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Across the conference table, my attorney, Daniel Reeves, slowly removed his glasses. Rachel Morgan stood near the door, neither defensive nor dramatic, just tired. Tired in a way that made me think she'd been carrying something for a long time. You shouldn't be here, I said. I know. She didn't argue. That wasn't like Rachel. Usually she had an answer ready for everything. A joke, a distraction, a reason to avoid conflict. Today she looked like someone who had run out of places to hide. The silver flash drive rested
I have
between us,
something I need to tell
small
you.
enough to fit in a pocket, heavy enough
Yes?
to stop a divorce. Daniel leaned forward.
It's about the
Rachel,
financial.
if this has anything to do with the settlement process, I strongly suggest it doesn't. She cut him off gently, then her eyes moved to me. It has to do with why you're signing those papers. I laughed once, not because anything was funny, because I'd spent months hearing versions of the same conversation. People wanted to tell me what happened, why Olivia left, why I should let go, why fighting back would only make things worse. Nobody ever wanted to know what actually happened. They already had their story. I was the controlling husband, the difficult one, the man who couldn't accept reality. Eventually, I got tired of defending myself. Eventually, I started wondering if silence was easier. Maybe silence looked more dignified. Maybe silence hurt less. I was wrong about that. Silence simply gave everyone more room to speak for me. What is it? I asked. Rachel looked down at the flash drive. Then
Do you have
back
the
at
proof?
me. Proof.
Yes.
Daniel Seahid. The kind of sigh lawyers use when they see trouble approaching. Proof of what? Rachel swallowed. Proof that Olivia started building her exit long before she told anyone she was unhappy. The room became still. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just still. Like something had shifted slightly beneath the floor. I stared at her. That's a serious accusation. I know. Then why bring it now? The answer didn't come immediately. Rachel's fingers tightened around the strap of her purse. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded smaller. Because I should have done it months ago. Daniel looked between us. What's on the drive? Rachel hesitated. That bothered me more than anything else. Rachel wasn't afraid of awkward conversations. She wasn't afraid of uncomfortable truths. At least that was what I'd always believed. Today, she seemed afraid of herself. Audio files? She said. Emails. Backups. Conversations. The list continued. Each word adding weight to the tiny piece of metal sitting on the table. I looked at the divorce papers, then at the flash drive. One represented an ending. The other represented uncertainty. At that moment, uncertainty felt more dangerous. Daniel pushed his chair back slightly. Ethan, I knew what he was thinking. The divorce was nearly finalized. The legal process had taken months. Every delay had cost money, energy, sleep, whatever remained of my reputation. If this changes nothing, he said carefully, You'll still be signing eventually. I nodded. Then I reached for the flash drive. Rachel exhaled. The sound was barely noticeable, but I heard it. The relief, the fear, the guilt, all mixed together. My laptop sat inside my messenger bag. I pulled it onto the table, opened it, inserted the drive. The screen flickered. A folder appeared. No title, no explanation, just dates. Dozens of them. Month after month. Daniel frowned. Rachel looked away. The oldest file was nearly a year old. 3 months before Olivia moved out. 3 months before she started telling people our marriage had become unbearable. 3 months before my life turned into a version of itself I barely recognized. I clicked the first audio file. Static filled the room. Then, voices. Olivia's voice. Another woman's voice. Neither sounded aware they were being recorded. For a moment, I didn't understand what I was hearing. Then Olivia laughed. A familiar laugh. The kind she used when she believed she'd already won an argument. The sound made something tighten in my chest. "You know what's funny?" she said. "I don't even think Ethan sees it coming." The room disappeared. The conference table disappeared. Everything narrowed to the speakers. The second voice asked something I couldn't quite hear. Olivia answered immediately. "He'll apologize." Another laugh. "He always does." Nobody moved. The recording continued. Every word felt strangely ordinary. There was no affair confession, no dramatic betrayal, no shocking revelation, just certainty. Certainty that she could predict me, manage me, shape my reaction before it happened. The file ended. Silence followed. Not the silence I'd lived with for months. A different kind. A dangerous kind. I leaned back slowly. Rachel kept staring at the floor. Daniel folded his arms. Where did this come from? Rachel didn't answer right away. That worried me, because Rachel always answered questions. Eventually, she looked up. "It doesn't matter. It absolutely matters," Daniel said. "It matters legally. It matters ethically. It matters because if this was obtained illegally, it wasn't." Rachel's voice sharpened, the first sign of emotion she'd shown since arriving. Then she closed her eyes briefly, as if she regretted speaking. I watched her, really watched her. For the first time since she'd entered the room, there were dark circles beneath her eyes. Her hair wasn't styled the way it usually was. She looked exhausted, not physically, morally, as though every step that brought her here had cost something. I clicked another file. Rachel stepped forward immediately. "No." My hand froze. The word came out too quickly, too urgently. Daniel noticed. So did I. Rachel looked at the screen, then at me. "Not yet." "Why?" "Because if you listen to everything at once, you'll hear the evidence." She paused. "But you'll miss the story." I stared at her. The sentence felt strange, specific, deliberate. Rachel took a slow breath. Then, she pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. For the first time since entering the room, she stopped acting like a messenger. Now she looked like a witness. "Ethan," she said quietly, "before you decide what to do with those papers," her eyes drifted to the divorce documents, then back to me. "You need to know who has been writing the story everyone believes." Outside the window, traffic moved through the city. People crossed intersections. Cars
I
stopped
want to
at
know
red
who
lights.
gave you that
Somewhere
information.
nearby, a siren echoed between
It doesn't
buildings.
matter. It's what's
Normal
on the
life
drive
continued.
that counts.
Yet suddenly, nothing felt normal. Because for 8 months I had been trying to answer one question. How did I become the villain in my own marriage? And sitting across from me was the first person who seemed willing to answer it. The flash drive remained connected to the laptop. A small silver object. Ordinary. Forgettable. But somehow, it had already done something no lawyer, friend, family member, or therapist had managed to do. It made me doubt the story. Not my story. Theirs. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't wondering how to defend myself. I was wondering what else I hadn't been allowed to see. The divorce papers remained unsigned. That should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like standing in the middle of an intersection after the traffic lights stopped working. Everything that had been moving in one direction suddenly wasn't. Daniel had advised me to go home, get some sleep, stay away from decisions for 24 hours. I agreed because arguing required more energy than I had left. The elevator ride down from his office felt longer than usual. Every mirrored surface reflected a man who looked older than 37. Not physically. Weariness has its own shape, its own posture, its own way of settling into someone's shoulders. Outside, Chicago moved normally. People rushed toward trains. A cyclist cursed at a taxi. A couple argued while waiting to cross the street. Nobody knew my marriage had just been paused by a silver flash drive. Nobody cared. Part of me envied that. I stopped at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office. Not because I wanted coffee. Because routine was easier than uncertainty. The girl behind the counter recognized me immediately. Medium black? I nodded. She smiled politely. Then the smile faded. The same thing had happened dozens of times over the past few months. People recognized me, then remembered something. An article. Act time. A social media post. A conversation. A rumor. The version of Ethan Carter that had become easier to believe. When she handed me the cup, she hesitated. You doing okay? The question sounded genuine. That somehow made it worse. I'm fine. The lie came automatically. She nodded, even though neither of us believed it. Back outside, I checked my phone. 3 unread messages. 1 from my brother, 1 from a coworker, 1 from a former neighbor, all asking different versions of the same thing. How are you holding up? Nobody asked what actually happened, only how I was surviving what they assumed had happened. A black SUV rolled through a puddle and sprayed water onto the curb. I stepped back just in time. Then my phone rang. Greg Thompson, senior project manager. One of the few people from work who still called instead of texting. Hey. His voice carried the awkward caution people use around injuries. Hey, you coming in tomorrow? I stared through the coffee shop window. A father was helping his daughter stir whipped cream into hot chocolate. Simple. Ordinary. I'll be there. You sure? Why wouldn't I be? Greg hesitated. That answer told me everything. Because people don't pause before easy truths. Only difficult ones. Finally, he said, some clients have been talking. I laughed softly. Talking. Yeah, neither of us needed details. We both knew what that meant. The story had traveled. Olivia had never publicly accused me of anything criminal. She didn't need to. A suggestion was more powerful than an accusation. Accusations can be disproven. Suggestions grow on their own. Listen, Greg said quietly. I don't believe half the stuff I've heard. Half? Not all. Half. The conversation ended a few minutes later. I wasn't angry at him. That was the problem. I understood him. Most people didn't wake up hoping to believe lies. They simply trusted the story that sounded cleaner. Victims were easier to support than complications. Heroes were easier to celebrate than gray areas. By the time I reached my apartment building, the coffee had gone cold. I carried it upstairs anyway. The apartment greeted me with silence. A different silence than before. When Olivia first left, the silence felt temporary, like a guest. Now it lived there. The bookshelf by the living room window was half empty. She had taken her novels. Left mine. Even our books had separated more efficiently than we did. I dropped my keys into a ceramic bowl near the door. The bowl had been a wedding gift. One of hundreds. Most were gone. This one remained because neither of us wanted it enough to take it. The irony wasn't lost on me. My phone buzzed again. Mason. This time, I answered immediately. You sound terrible. Hello to you too. I'm serious. I loosened my tie and sat on the couch. You eat today? There it was. The Carter family love language. Not feelings. Food. I had coffee. Coffee isn't food. I know. A sigh crackled through the speaker. Then he said something that made me smile. You remember sophomore year? Unfortunately, I did. The memory arrived instantly. A basketball game. A bad call. A teammate who blamed me for a loss. I had apologized even though the mistake wasn't mine. The entire bus ride home. Over and over. Sorry, sorry, sorry. Until Mason finally snapped. Why are you apologizing? Because somebody was upset. That had been my answer. Because somebody was upset. My brother remembered too. You've been doing that your whole life. I leaned back against the couch. The ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. When Dad got angry. When Mom got disappointed. When teachers got frustrated, you always thought keeping peace was your job. I closed my eyes. The annoying thing about younger brothers is that sometimes they become old enough to be right. After hanging up, I wandered into the kitchen. An empty wine rack stood beside the refrigerator. Olivia had taken every bottle except one. The cheapest one. Another practical decision. Another tiny reminder that she planned things carefully. A knock sounded at the door. Unexpected enough to make me freeze. Nobody visited anymore. Not without warning. I crossed the apartment and opened it. Rachel stood in the hallway holding a brown paper bag. My first reaction wasn't surprise. It was confusion. She raised the bag slightly. You skipped lunch. I blinked. What? You skip meals when you're stressed. She said it like a weather report. A simple fact. Not criticism. Not concern. Just observation. The hallway light cast soft shadows across her face. She looked tired. Almost as tired as she had in Daniel's office. You drove all the way here because I missed lunch? No. A faint smile appeared. That would be weird. I waited. She shifted the bag from one hand to the other. I was already nearby. The lie wasn't convincing. We both knew it. Neither of us mentioned it. Eventually, I stepped aside. Rachel entered the apartment. Her gaze drifted around the room, not judging, not inspecting, just noticing. Most visitors commented on what was missing. Rachel noticed what remained. The wedding photos still sitting on a shelf. The second coffee mug beside the sink. The blanket folded neatly over the armchair. Small things. Evidence of someone trying to move on while secretly standing still. You kept that? She pointed toward the ceramic bowl near the door. I shrugged. Didn't seem worth throwing away. Rachel studied it for a second. Then, said quietly, That's always been your problem. I frowned. The bowl? No. Her eyes met mine. You keep things after everyone else decides they're done with them? The sentence landed harder than she intended. Or maybe exactly as hard as she intended. Because suddenly, she wasn't talking about bowls. Or blankets. Or coffee mugs. She was talking about me. The man who stayed too long. Forgave too quickly. Apologized too often. The man who kept trying to save relationships after the other person had already left. Rachel seemed to realize what she'd said. A flicker of regret crossed her face. But she didn't take it back. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, she placed the paper bag on the kitchen counter. Eat something. Then she headed toward the door. Rachel. She stopped. When did you start noticing all this? Her hand remained on the doorknob. A long moment passed. Then she answered without turning around. A lot earlier than I should have. The door closed softly behind her. And for the rest of the night, that answer bothered me far more than anything I had heard on the flash drive. The flash drive stayed untouched for most of the next morning. Not because I wasn't curious, because I knew curiosity wasn't the problem. The problem was what happened after. Once you learn something, you can't unknow it. By 9:30, I was sitting in my office staring at a project schedule that hadn't moved in 20 minutes. My inbox filled. My phone buzzed. People needed answers. Approvals. Decisions. Normally, I could disappear into work. Work had always been my safest place. Numbers behaved logically. Deadlines didn't lie. Projects either succeeded or failed. People were harder. At 10:15, Rachel texted, Have you looked at the rest yet? I answered honestly, No. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then, Don't do it at work. That was all. No explanation. No pressure. Just a warning. By lunchtime, I had made exactly 0 progress on anything important. At 1 o'clock, I packed my laptop and left. An hour later, I was sitting at my dining table. The flash drive connected. The first folders opened. There was no dramatic reveal waiting inside. No affair photos. No secret second family. Nothing that obvious. Instead, there was something worse. Organization. Every folder had dates. Every file had labels. Everything was arranged carefully, methodically, like someone had been documenting a process. I opened a document called Timeline. The file contained hundreds of entries. Emails, conversations, calendar events, notes. At first, none of it made sense. Then patterns started appearing. Olivia's complaints about our marriage had not begun when she told me they began. They appeared months earlier. Private conversations, messages to friends, draft emails never sent. The timeline showed something disturbing. The story changed depending on the audience. To one friend, I was emotionally distant. To another, I was controlling. To someone else, I was clingy. The details shifted. The conclusion stayed the same. Ethan was the problem. I kept scrolling. A pressure gathered behind my eyes. Not anger, recognition. I had spent months trying to understand what I had done wrong. Meanwhile, the accusations themselves had been changing shape. The realization felt like stepping onto a staircase and discovering the next step wasn't there. My phone vibrated. Rachel, find something? I put the call on speaker. Maybe? The hesitation in my voice must have told her everything. What file are you reading? The timeline. A long pause followed. Then, keep going. You already know what's in this. I know some of it. Some. Not all. Interesting. I opened another folder. Email drafts. Most were unfinished. Many were never sent. One subject line caught my attention immediately. Things are getting worse. The draft had been written nearly 4 months before Olivia moved out. I opened it. Halfway through the second paragraph, my stomach tightened. Olivia described feeling trapped, misunderstood, controlled. The language sounded familiar, almost identical to things she later told friends. Then I noticed something. The draft wasn't finished. Several paragraphs were highlighted. Alternative wording sat below them. Different versions of the same story, different emotional tones, different descriptions, like someone testing possibilities. My chair scraped lightly across the floor. Rachel heard it. What happened? I read part of the email aloud. The line remained quiet. Then, keep reading. I hated that answer, because it meant she already knew where this was going. 20 minutes later, I found the entry that changed everything. Not because it was the worst, because it was the clearest. A calendar screenshot, attached to an email draft, 3 months before our separation. The note beneath it read, "Need everyone to understand before I leave." I read it twice, then a third time. Need everyone to understand before I leave. Not after. Before. My pulse slowed. That happened when I got angry. Not faster. Slower. Dangerously calm. The sentence wasn't proof of a crime. It wasn't even proof of deception. But it suggested something I hadn't considered. Preparation. Narrative. Planning. Someone deciding how a story should sound before telling it. Rachel finally spoke. You okay? No. Honest answer. First one all day. The apartment felt smaller. The timeline remained open on the screen. Dates stretched back month after month. Not evidence of a sudden collapse. Evidence of construction. Like watching workers build a house you never knew existed. Then I found something that hurt. Really hurt? A message exchange between Olivia and Linda Brooks. One of our closest friends, the woman who had stopped speaking to me after the separation. I clicked it. The first few messages were harmless. Then Olivia wrote, "He'll apologize for this too." My hand tightened around the edge of the table. The sentence looked familiar, because I had already heard it. In the recording, different day, same confidence, same certainty. Then came Linda's response. "Sometimes I think you're too hard on him." Olivia replied less than a minute later. That's why I have to explain it properly. The words sat on the screen, motionless, cold. I remembered the last conversation I'd had with Linda. She had told me she hoped I got help. Help. Not healing. Not peace. Help. Because by then she already believed a version of me I didn't recognize. And now I understood why. The realization hurt more than I expected. Not because I lost a friend, because I had never even entered the room where the decision was made. People talk about betrayal as if it arrives with a crash. Sometimes it arrives quietly, one conversation at a time, one explanation at a time, one carefully placed sentence at a time. The phone remained connected. Rachel hadn't said much. Neither had I. Eventually she asked, "Do you understand why I brought it now?" I leaned back. The chair creaked beneath me. No. The answer surprised both of us. Because it was true. I still didn't understand. If she knew some of this existed, why wait? Why now? Why after 8 months? Rachel exhaled slowly. I thought she'd stop. The words landed awkwardly. Incomplete. Almost accidental. What? I thought she'd stop telling the story once she left. Silence. Then, I was wrong. There it was. Not a confession. Not yet. But something close. A crack. Small. Easy to miss. I filed it away for later. Another folder remained unopened. Backup export. The largest file on the drive. Nearly 2 gigabytes. I moved the cursor over it. Rachel's voice sharpened immediately. Ethan. What? That one changes things. I froze. The warning felt different from before. Not fear. Certainty. The kind people have when they already know where the road ends. What is it? She hesitated, long enough to make my stomach tighten. Then she answered, "That's the folder Olivia never knew existed." My hand stayed on the mouse. Neither of us spoke. Because suddenly, the timeline wasn't the biggest problem anymore. The email drafts weren't the biggest problem. The recordings weren't the biggest problem. Something larger was waiting inside that folder. And judging by Rachel's voice, whatever it was, had the power to change more than a marriage. It could change the entire story. The invitation arrived Thursday morning, a charity fundraising dinner, one of the largest annual events hosted by the architectural foundation Ethan's company supported every year. Normally, he would have declined. Normally, nobody would have noticed. This year was different. His company had already paid for a table, his name was already printed on the guest list, and according to Greg, several important clients would be attending. So Ethan put on a navy suit and went. The ballroom occupied the entire second floor of a downtown hotel. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead. Servers moved between tables carrying trays of wine and appetizers. People smiled, shook hands, pretended everything was normal. At first, it almost worked. Then Ethan noticed the conversation stopping. Not dramatically, just briefly. A glance, a lowered voice, a quick shift of attention. The same pattern he'd been seeing for months. Only larger, public, visible. He found his assigned table. Greg was already there. So was Linda Brooks. The sight of her caught him off guard. Months earlier, Linda had been one of the closest friends he and Olivia shared. Now she looked uncomfortable enough to leave. Ethan. Her smile arrived late, a fraction of a second too late. The kind of delay that reveals more than words. Linda. Neither of them sat immediately. Eventually, Greg rescued the moment. Open seat right here. Ethan took it. Linda chose 1-2 chairs away. The distance felt deliberate. Conversation drifted around the table. Projects, travel, the economy, anything except the thing everyone wanted to discuss. A server filled water glasses. Another distributed menus. Across the ballroom, laughter erupted from another table. Normal sounds. Normal people. Ethan focused on them. Then the room shifted. Not physically, socially. Heads turned toward the entrance. Whispers spread. A ripple moving across the crowd. Ethan followed the movement. Olivia had arrived. She wore a dark green dress. Elegant. Carefully understated. The kind of appearance designed to look effortless. Several people greeted her immediately. One woman embraced her. A man touched her shoulder sympathetically. Olivia accepted every gesture with practiced grace. Then her gaze found Ethan. Just for a second. No smile. No anger. No surprise. Only awareness. Like a chess player recognizing a familiar position. Rachel entered a few moments later. Alone, the contrast was impossible to miss. Olivia moved through a crowd. Rachel moved around it. Different social gravity. Different consequences. Rachel spotted Ethan's table and hesitated. A seat remained open beside him. Before she could reach it, Karen Wells intercepted her. Olivia's mother. Karen spoke quietly. Rachel answered. Karen's expression hardened. The exchange lasted less than a minute. When it ended, Rachel walked away and took a seat at another table, 3 rows back. Far enough to matter? Ethan understood immediately. Someone didn't want her near him. The dinner began. Announcements, introductions, applause. Halfway through the main course, a guest speaker stepped onto the stage, a respected business consultant. His topic was resilience, second chances, public perception. Most people listened politely. Then he said something unfortunate. You can't control the stories people tell about you. A few people chuckled. Several heads turned toward Ethan. Only briefly, but long enough. Heat climbed his neck. Not because of the speaker, because of the reaction, the assumption, the reminder. Across the room, Olivia lowered her eyes. Perfect timing, perfect execution, victimhood without effort. Ethan's hand tightened around his water glass. Old instinct kicked in. Explain, clarify, fix the misunderstanding, smooth things over. The same reflex he'd carried since childhood. The same reflex that had kept him apologizing for other people's choices. His phone vibrated beneath the table. One message. Rachel, don't. Nothing else. Just one word. Don't. Ethan placed the phone face down. The speaker continued. The audience applauded. Dinner resumed. Then came the real wound. Not from Olivia. From Linda. During dessert, a conversation started at the far end of the table. Someone mentioned relationships. Another mentioned trust. The topic drifted naturally, dangerously. A woman Ethan barely knew asked, Are you and Olivia speaking at all these days? The table became still. Not silent. Attentive. Everyone heard the question. Nobody rescued it. Ethan could have answered a dozen different ways. Instead, he chose the truth. Not much. The woman nodded sympathetically. Before anyone else could speak, Linda said, Sometimes space is healthier. The sentence sounded harmless, until she added, for everyone involved. Everyone. The word landed harder than she realized, or maybe exactly as hard as she intended. Several people exchanged glances. Nobody challenged it. Nobody asked what she meant, because they already knew, or believed they did. The story had done its work. Ethan felt the familiar urge to apologize, to reassure, to make everyone comfortable. The urge disgusted him, yet it remained. A habit built over decades. Across the ballroom, Rachel had stopped eating. Her attention stayed fixed on the table. She knew what was happening. He could see it. She wanted to intervene. But from 3 rows away, she couldn't enter the conversation without looking defensive, or suspicious, or, worse, biased. The trap was perfect. The accusation remained implied, therefore impossible to confront directly. Then Olivia delivered the final blow. It happened during the charity raffle. People mingled between tables. Conversations mixed. Voices overlapped. Olivia ended up standing within earshot of Ethan and several clients. The positioning looked accidental. Nothing about Olivia was accidental. One client asked how she was doing. Olivia smiled sadly. I'm doing much better now. A pause. Then, peace changes people. Peace. There it was. The dangerous word. Not abuse. Not manipulation. Peace. A word that quietly suggested what life had supposedly been before. The clients nodded. Someone touched her arm. Another offered support. Nobody needed additional details. The implication was enough. Ethan felt every eye in the area shift toward him. Not openly, indirectly, the way people observe a storm through a window. Rachel stood halfway across the ballroom. Her jaw tightened. She took one step forward, then stopped. Because if she spoke now, everyone would ask why. And Rachel wasn't ready to answer that question. Not yet. The evening ended an hour later. Guests gathered coats. Business cards changed hands. Valets retrieved cars. Ethan headed toward the exit. A client he had known for 6 years caught up with him near the doors. The man looked embarrassed, almost apologetic. I hope things work out. Ethan nodded. The client hesitated, then lowered his voice. For what it's worth, you don't seem like the kind of guy people describe. People describe, not person. People, plural. The story was everywhere. The client walked away before Ethan could answer. Outside, cold air hit his face. Rachel emerged from the hotel moments later. She stopped several feet away. Neither of them spoke immediately. Traffic rolled past. Headlights streaked across wet pavement. Finally, Ethan said, "They believe her." Rachel didn't answer, because there was nothing to argue with. The evidence existed. The truth existed. But neither had entered the room tonight. Only the story had. And the story won. For now. Rain started shortly after midnight. Not a storm. Just a steady rhythm against the apartment windows. Ethan sat at the dining table with the laptop closed in front of him. The flash drive remained connected, the larger folder still unopened. For the first time since Rachel had appeared in Daniel's office, he wasn't thinking about evidence. He was thinking about her. Not romantically. Not yet. Just differently. People rarely walked toward trouble. Rachel had. That mattered. A knock interrupted the thought. 3 short taps? Nothing urgent. Nothing hesitant. He already knew who it was. When he opened the door, Rachel stood there, holding 2 paper grocery bags. Ethan blinked. What is this? Dinner. You brought groceries? You clearly weren't going to cook. A corner of his mouth lifted. You keep making assumptions. Rachel stepped past him. And they keep being correct. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and rain. Rachel placed the bags on the kitchen counter and began unpacking them. Pasta, tomatoes, garlic, bread. Simple things. Ordinary things. For several minutes, neither of them mentioned Olivia. Or the flash drive. Or the charity dinner. Rachel tied her hair back, rolled up her sleeves, and started chopping vegetables. The scene felt strangely normal. That was what made it dangerous. Because Ethan couldn't remember the last time anything had felt normal. Hand me that knife. He passed it over. Rachel nodded. Thank you. The words landed softly. No hidden meaning. No emotional weight. Just gratitude. It struck Ethan how long it had been since a conversation felt that simple. Eventually, Rachel noticed the untouched laptop. You didn't open it. No. You should. I know. The knife stopped moving. Then why didn't you? Ethan leaned against the counter. Because the honest answer was embarrassing. Because evidence was easier than emotions. Because opening another folder felt easier than admitting what the charity dinner had done to him. I was tired. Rachel didn't believe him. Neither did he. But she let the answer sit there. The sauce simmered. Rain tapped against the glass. A city siren echoed somewhere in the distance. Small sounds, human sounds, the kind that make silence feel less lonely. Finally, Ethan spoke. Linda used to spend Christmas with us. Rachel looked up. He continued. 6 years. Every Christmas. The knife resumed moving. Slowly. Carefully. She believed Olivia. Rachel said nothing. That hurt more than agreement would have. Because she knew. The dinner finished cooking. Neither of them moved toward the table immediately. Instead, Rachel reached for a bowl in the cabinet. The edge slipped. Porcelain struck her hand. A sharp curse escaped before she could stop it. The bowl survived. Her knuckle didn't. A thin line of blood appeared. Instinct moved faster than thought. Ethan crossed the kitchen, grabbed a dish towel, wrapped it around her hand. Rachel stared at him. Neither spoke. The moment lasted longer than it should have. Not because of the cut, because of the closeness, because grief and loneliness distort ordinary things. A hand, a glance, a shared breath. All of them become louder. Rachel pulled away first. I'm fine. The sentence arrived too quickly. Ethan released the towel. So am I. That earned him a look. Not angry, not convinced. Dinner happened at the small kitchen table. No television, no music, no distractions. Halfway through the meal, Rachel set down her fork. The movement alone told Ethan something important was coming. People have tells. Rachel's was stillness. When she stopped moving, she was usually deciding whether to tell the truth. Ethan, there it was. The tone, the warning. He waited. Rachel stared into her glass of water. Then said, I need to tell you something before we go any further. Not we. Not us. This. The situation. The truth. The fight. Still. The word lingered. Further? Ethan sat back. Okay. Rachel took a breath, then another. Neither seemed enough. Finally, she spoke. I covered for her. The sentence landed quietly. No dramatic pause. No tears. Just fact. Ethan didn't immediately understand. Covered what? Rachel's eyes closed briefly. Not everything. A humorless smile touched her face. That would somehow be worse. The smile vanished. One message. The apartment suddenly felt much smaller. Rachel continued. About 2 years ago, Olivia was texting someone. Nothing physical. Nothing that crossed a line. She swallowed. But the conversation looked bad. Ethan remained still. Every instinct told him to ask who. Instead, he asked, What did you do? Rachel looked directly at him. I lied. No excuse. No qualifications. No softening. Just the truth. The answer hurt because of its simplicity. I told myself it wasn't important. Her voice grew quieter. I told myself marriages go through things. I told myself I wasn't responsible. Rain struck the windows harder. Neither moved. Neither touched their food. I deleted screenshots. The words arrived like broken glass. Small, sharp, impossible to put back. Ethan stared at her. Months of isolation. Months of whispers. Months of being slowly rewritten. And somewhere inside, all of it sat one moment when somebody could have chosen differently. Rachel's eyes shimmered. Not with self-pity. With shame. The distinction mattered. I didn't stay silent because I was afraid. Her voice trembled. Not entirely. The admission sounded expensive. Like something she'd been paying interest on for years. A long pause followed. Then, part of me wanted her to be right. Ethan frowned. Rachel forced herself to continue. Because if she was right, if she really was trapped, then I didn't have to question what I was seeing. The honesty was brutal and strangely believable. Perfect people don't tell the truth that way. They edit it. Rachel wasn't editing. She was bleeding, emotionally, right there at the table. Ethan pushed his plate away. Not dramatically, just enough to create space. I lost friends. Rachel nodded. I know. My brother stopped talking to Olivia because of this. Another nod. I know. My mother spent months wondering if she raised someone she didn't recognize. Rachel closed her eyes. The pain on her face wasn't defensive. It was acceptance. She knew. That was the worst part. She already knew. The rain softened outside. Neither spoke for nearly a minute. Then, Rachel stood. Maybe she intended to leave. Maybe she simply needed air. The movement brought her beside Ethan's chair, close enough that he could see the exhaustion beneath her eyes, close enough to understand how easy it would be to mistake vulnerability for intimacy. The temptation lasted a second, maybe two. Then Rachel stepped back, creating distance herself, deliberately, carefully, necessary distance. No lies between us anymore. Her voice was quiet, firm, adult. Ethan nodded. The statement wasn't romantic. It was more important than romantic. Trust always comes before love. Or at least healthy love. Rachel picked up her coat, moved toward the door, then stopped, one hand resting on the doorknob. You're allowed to be angry. The sentence lingered after she left. The apartment became silent again. Not the same silence as before. A different one. Heavier. More honest. The laptop remained on the table. The flash drive remained connected. But the biggest discovery of the night hadn't come from the evidence. It came from Rachel. And for the first time since this started, Ethan understood something unsettling. The person helping him find the truth was carrying secrets of her own. The call from Daniel came at 7:12 the next morning. Ethan answered before the second ring. Something happened. Not hello. Not good morning. Lawyers rarely called early with good news. Daniel didn't waste time. I need you downtown. How bad? A pause. Bad enough. 45 minutes later, Ethan sat across from Daniel's desk. 3 folders lay open between them. The flash drive remained inside Ethan's coat pocket. Unused. Forgotten for the moment. Daniel slid a document forward. Read page 3. Ethan did. Halfway down the page, his stomach tightened. The language looked legal, neutral, professional. The consequences weren't. She's requesting a review of shared financial disclosures. Daniel nodded. Why? Officially? Yes. Concerns regarding transparency. Ethan dropped the paper onto the desk. The accusation wasn't dangerous because it was true. It was dangerous because it wasn't. Every account had already been disclosed. Every statement submitted. Every requirement met. Yet now another review meant more delays. More fees. More paperwork. More suspicion. Daniel folded his hands. There's something else. Of course there was. There always is. The lawyer didn't smile. One of your larger clients requested a different project manager yesterday. The sentence landed harder than the financial review. Money can be recovered. Reputation moves slower. Greg told me. No. Daniel shook his head. He told me because the client called him directly. Ethan leaned back. The office ceiling suddenly seemed very far away. Months ago, his marriage had been collapsing. Now it was bleeding into work. Exactly what Olivia claimed she never wanted. Daniel studied him carefully. You need to prepare for this getting uglier. Ethan stared at the folders. Legal fees. Project risk. Client concerns. The truth had a price tag. Nobody mentioned that part in inspirational quotes. By noon, Ethan had signed 4 new disclosure forms. At 1 o'clock, he was carrying 2 banker boxes from a storage facility, tax records, mortgage documents, bank statements, years of life reduced to paper. The elevator in his apartment building was out of service. 9 flights, 2 heavy boxes. By the time he reached his door, sweat soaked through the back of his shirt. The physical exhaustion felt almost welcome. Physical problems made sense. Emotional ones rarely did. A text arrived while he stacked documents in the living room. Rachel, how's your day? Ethan stared at the screen, then at the mountain of paperwork surrounding him. He typed, fantastic. 3 seconds later, that bad? He smiled despite himself. Another message appeared. Need help? The answer should have been no. Instead, he found himself typing, maybe. Rachel arrived less than an hour later. No groceries this time. No dinner. Just jeans, a gray sweater, and practical shoes. She stopped in the doorway. The paperwork occupied half the room. Wow, that's apparently what my life costs. Rachel closed the door behind her. For the next hour, they worked. Sorting documents, creating piles, labeling folders, simple tasks, necessary tasks. The kind of work that leaves little room for emotional speeches. At one point, Rachel found an old photo tucked between tax forms. A vacation picture. 3 years earlier. Ethan and Olivia standing beside a lake, both smiling. Rachel studied it briefly, then placed it face down. No commentary, no pity, just respect. The gesture stayed with Ethan, because most people either ignored old wounds or poked at them. Rachel simply moved around them. As afternoon faded toward evening, The stacks became organized. The apartment looked less like a disaster zone. Rachel carried a final folder toward the bookshelf. When she turned around, Ethan was watching her. Not intentionally, not consciously, just watching. The realization hit both of them at the same moment. Rachel stopped moving. The folder remained in her hands. Neither spoke. The air shifted, subtle, dangerous. Not because anything happened, because something almost did. Weeks earlier, Ethan wouldn't have noticed. Now he did. Loneliness has gravity. So does gratitude. Combined together, they become something people frequently mistake for love. Rachel set the folder down. Slowly, deliberately, then took a step back. Distance. Necessary distance. Ethan understood immediately. That somehow made it harder. You know, he said quietly. Rachel looked toward the window. The city lights reflected faintly in the glass. Maybe. I wouldn't blame them. No. Another pause. You wouldn't. The honesty hurt. Because she was right. Ethan rarely blamed people, even when they deserved it. Especially when they deserved it. Rachel crossed her arms, as if bracing herself against the conversation. Ethan. That tone again. The warning tone. The one that usually arrived before truth. We need to be careful. There it was. Not romance. Not rejection. Something more mature than either. Ethan nodded slowly. I know. Do you? Rachel's eyes met his. Direct. Steady. Not unkind. If anything ever happens between us, the sentence hung in the air, neither pretending not to understand it, neither rushing toward it. It can't start in the wreckage she made. The words settled between them. Clear. Adult. Necessary. Ethan lowered his gaze briefly. The paperwork. The divorce. The investigations. The unfinished truth. She was right. Every part of her was right. I don't want you to become an escape hatch. Rachel didn't answer. He continued. I don't want to wake up 6 months from now and wonder whether I chose you. The sentence stalled. Not because he lacked words, because he hated the ones he had, or whether I chose relief. Rachel's expression softened. Not romantically. Respectfully. A distinction that mattered. Outside, headlights moved across wet pavement below. The city carried on, unaware of the boundary being built inside a 9th-floor apartment. Finally, Ethan spoke again. Not while I'm still fighting to get my own name back. Rachel released a breath she seemed to have been holding all day. A small smile appeared. The first genuine one in hours. Good. Good? That was the right answer. Ethan laughed quietly. There was a test? There was absolutely a test. That earned a real smile from him. Brief. Tired. Real. An hour later, Rachel prepared to leave. She collected her coat, checked for her keys, moved toward the door, then paused. Daniel's right. Ethan frowned. About what? This isn't going to stay contained. The smile had vanished. Work mode. Reality mode. The dangerous mode. Rachel nodded toward the document boxes. The moment people realize you're pushing back, her voice trailed off. Neither needed the ending. The sentence completed itself. The story would fight back. Because stories always do. Especially when they've been winning. After she left, Ethan remained near the doorway for several minutes. The apartment felt quieter, but not empty. Different. The paperwork still covered half the living room. The financial review remained active. The client remained gone. The divorce remained unfinished. The truth was becoming more expensive every day. Yet for the first time in months, Ethan wasn't calculating what it would cost to keep the peace. He was calculating what it would cost to stop surrendering it. The first sign arrived on a Monday morning. Not through a lawyer. Not through Olivia. Through a notification. Ethan was halfway through a project meeting when his phone vibrated repeatedly inside his jacket pocket. He ignored it. Then it vibrated again. And again. By the 4th time, Evie? Greg noticed. You should probably check that. The conference room overlooked the river. Blueprints covered the table. A client presentation sat open on the screen. Normal work. Normal responsibilities. Ethan stepped into the hallway and unlocked his phone. 32 notifications. His stomach tightened immediately. People only contact you that quickly for 2 reasons. A celebration or a disaster. This wasn't a celebration. The first message came from Mason. Call me to now. The second, don't react. The third, whatever you do, don't answer anyone yet. Ethan opened social media. A video filled the screen. His own voice. His own face. His own living room. For a split second he didn't understand what he was watching. Then he recognized it. A recording. Months old. One argument. One conversation. One terrible night near the end of the marriage. The clip lasted 28 seconds. Only 28. That was enough. The editing removed everything before. Everything after. Everything important. The version online showed Ethan raising his voice. Frustrated. Angry. Demanding answers. Nothing illegal. Nothing threatening. But stripped of context, it looked ugly. Dangerously ugly. The caption beneath it was worse. This is who people call the nice guy. Thousands of views. Growing by the second. Ethan lowered the phone. His heartbeat remained strangely calm, the way it always did before something broke. Back inside the conference room, Greg saw his face and immediately stood. What happened? Ethan handed him the phone. Greg watched silently, then swore. Softly, professionally, but sincerely. Who posted it? No idea. That answer lasted less than an hour, because by noon everyone knew. The video had first appeared through an anonymous account, then spread through people connected to Olivia. Nobody technically accused her. Nobody had to. The fingerprints were everywhere. The damage moved faster than proof. It always does. By lunchtime, Ethan's inbox contained 27 emails. Half offered support. The other half offered concern. Concern is a dangerous word. Concern sounds reasonable. Concern sounds responsible. Concern quietly assumes guilt. At 2 o'clock, another problem appeared. Linda Brooks called. The name surprised him enough to answer immediately. Ethan. Her voice sounded shaky. Not guilty. Worried. The distinction mattered. Linda. I think I made things worse. He closed his office door. What happened? Silence. Then, a reporter contacted me. Of course, one had. Stories attract attention, especially unfinished ones. I told him I didn't think you were dangerous. Not exactly comforting. Dangerous. The word lingered. Linda continued. I thought I was helping. Ethan already knew the ending. People always believe they're helping. What did you say? Another pause. Then, I told him Olivia used to talk about being afraid to disagree with you. The sentence hit harder than the video, because Linda believed she was defending him. Yet somehow the story grew anyway. Ally complication. Unintentional. Devastating. After the call ended, Ethan remained in his office. The city stretched beyond the windows. Traffic moved below. People crossed streets, ordered lunch, lived ordinary lives. Meanwhile, his own life was becoming public property. His phone buzzed. Rachel. One message. Where are you? Office. I'm coming. No discussion. New debate. 40 minutes later, she arrived carrying 2 coffees. The same practical energy she always carried. Purpose before emotion. She placed 1 cup on his desk. Neither touched it. You saw it. Not a question. Ethan nodded. Rachel exhaled sharply. I told her this would happen. The sentence slipped out before she could stop it. Ethan caught it immediately. Told who? Rachel Frosa. A fraction too long. Then, Olivia. There it was. Another complication. Not a lie. Not quite. But not the whole truth either. You've talked to her? Rachel rubbed her forehead. Twice? When? Recently. Anger flashed through him. Small. Brief. Real. Rachel noticed. She didn't defend herself. Didn't explain. Didn't retreat. Just accepted it. Why? Because I was trying to stop this. The answer sounded honest. That didn't make it feel better. Ethan stood and crossed toward the window. His reflection stared back. Distorted by glass. Distorted by sunlight. Distorted by everything. Rachel remained behind him. Several feet away, respecting the distance. Finally, she spoke. Don't do it. Ethan frowned. Do what? The answer arrived instantly. Apologize. The word landed like a punch. Because she knew. She knew exactly what he was considering. Not because she could read minds. Because she'd spent months watching him. And because the old wound always pulled in the same direction. Keep the peace. Reduce the damage. Take responsibility. Make it stop. Even when stopping it meant sacrificing yourself. Ethan pulled out his phone. A message draft already sat open. Addressed to Olivia. Only 1 sentence written. Let's end this. Rachel saw it. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then she shook her head. No, the answer wasn't emotional. It was firm. Adult. Certain. You don't get to apologize your way out of this one. Ethan stared at the unfinished message. His thumb hovered above the screen. The old reflex felt comforting, familiar, like stepping into a well-worn path through the woods. Wrong, but familiar. Rachel moved closer. Not close enough to touch him, just close enough to be heard. If you send that, her voice softened. You're not making peace. The city noise faded beneath the words. You're helping write the ending she wants. The message remained on the screen, waiting. One tap, one surrender, one return to the person he'd always been. The person who absorbed blame until everyone else felt comfortable. His thumb moved, then stopped. Slowly, Ethan deleted the sentence. One word at a time, Rachel released a breath. Not relief. Not victory. Recognition. Because they both understood what had just happened. The crisis wasn't the video. The crisis wasn't the internet. The crisis wasn't even Olivia. The crisis was that part of Ethan still wanted to solve everything by sacrificing himself. And for the first time, he hadn't. The phone buzzed again. Another notification. Another share. Another comment. The story was still spreading. The world was still choosing sides. Nothing was fixed. Nothing was safe. But something had changed. Not outside. Inside. And somewhere out there, whoever had released that recording probably expected Ethan to react exactly the way he always had. Apologize. Retreat. Disappear. Instead, he stood in his office watching the message thread go quiet. The apology unsent. The damage still growing. The fight still ahead. And for the first time in months, surrender felt harder than resistance. The meeting took place 11 days after the video appeared online. Not in a courtroom. Not on television. Not in front of reporters. The reality was smaller than that. A private mediation conference room on the 20th floor of an office building overlooking the river. One long table. 2 attorneys. A mediator. Several binders. Years of marriage compressed into paperwork. Daniel arrived first. Ethan followed. Neither spoke much. They had reached the point where strategy mattered more than conversation. The mediator entered shortly before noon. Professional. Neutral. Efficient. Then Olivia arrived. For a moment, Ethan almost didn't recognize her. Not because she looked different, because she looked exactly the same. The same controlled posture. The same careful expression. The same ability to appear reasonable before saying something devastating. She sat across from him. Neither offered a greeting. The mediator reviewed procedures. Everyone listened. Everyone pretended this was simply another legal discussion. Nobody believed that? The real subject sat beneath the paperwork. The story. Who owned it? Who controlled it? Who people believed? Halfway through the meeting, Olivia spoke. Calmly. Predictably. Dangerously. I never wanted any of this. The sentence floated across the table. The mediator nodded sympathetically. Daniel remained expressionless. Ethan simply listened. Olivia continued. I wanted peace. There was the word again. Peace. The same word from the charity event. The same word that quietly transformed her into a survivor and him into an obstacle. She didn't accuse him directly. That wasn't her style. Direct accusations can be challenged. Implications spread farther. I tried to move on. A pause. I hoped we could both heal. The performance was subtle, almost elegant. Months earlier, Ethan would have interrupted, defended himself, explained, argued. Today he waited. The mediator turned toward him. Would you like to respond? Every eye in the room shifted. The old reflex stirred. Explain, clarify, reduce tension, make everyone comfortable. The familiar instinct still existed. It simply wasn't in charge anymore. Ethan folded his hands on the table. No. The answer surprised everyone, including Olivia. A tiny flicker crossed her face. Gone almost immediately, but not fast enough. The first crack. The mediator looked confused. No? Ethan shook his head. I'm not interested in debating feelings. Silence. Olivia adjusted slightly in her chair. A small movement. The kind people make when a conversation leaves the script. Daniel said nothing. Exactly as planned. The mediator tried again. Then what would you like to discuss? Ethan reached into his briefcase. Not dramatically. Not triumphantly. Just deliberately. He removed a thin folder. One folder. Not the entire flash drive. Not every secret. Only what mattered. That choice had taken days. There were things inside the evidence archive that could destroy Olivia's reputation permanently. Humiliating things. Personal things. Things unrelated to the truth. Daniel had asked him twice whether he wanted to include them. Twice he had refused. This wasn't revenge. It couldn't become revenge. Ethan slid the folder across the table. The mediator opened it first, then paused, then read further. The room changed, not loudly, not visibly, but undeniably. Inside were dated communications, timeline entries, draft language, documents showing narrative preparation months before the separation. Nothing scandalous, nothing explosive, just patterns, consistent patterns. The mediator spent several minutes reviewing the material. Olivia remained still, too still. Finally, the mediator looked up. "Can you explain this?" Olivia smiled gently, a familiar smile, one Ethan had seen 1,000 times. "I was journaling." A reasonable answer, an effective answer. For a moment, it almost worked. Then she added, "I was trying to understand what I was experiencing." Again, reasonable, measured, safe. The mediator nodded slowly. The conversation could have ended there, probably would have ended there months earlier. Then Ethan spoke, not loudly, not emotionally, simply, clearly. "Then why did the description change?" Nobody interrupted. Nobody moved. He continued. "One friend heard I was distant. Another heard I was controlling. A third heard I was possessive." Olivia's smile remained, but something behind it shifted. A degree, maybe less. Ethan pressed forward. The details changed. The conclusion didn't. The mediator lowered the folder. Daniel stayed silent. Rachel wasn't there. That mattered. This had to be his voice. Nobody else's. Olivia crossed her arms. A defensive gesture she probably didn't realize she had made. The second crack. Small, human, real. People describe experiences differently. The answer came quickly. Too quickly. Ethan noticed. So did Daniel. The mediator wrote something down. Then Ethan asked the question that had lived inside him for months. Not rehearsed. Not planned. Necessary. If I was truly the problem, he stopped. Not for effect. To choose the correct words? If I was truly the problem, why did everyone need to know before you left? The question settled over the table. Nobody spoke. Olivia's eyes narrowed slightly. Only slightly. Yet it was enough. Because she understood exactly what he was referring to. The calendar note. Need everyone to understand before I leave. The mediator glanced between them. Olivia answered carefully. That's not what I meant. A dangerous response. Not because it was wrong, because it acknowledged the note immediately. The room became very still. Ethan didn't smile, didn't celebrate, didn't push. Instead, he asked, "What did you think I meant?" The question landed like a stone in water. For the first time all afternoon, Olivia hesitated. A single second. Maybe two. Long enough. Because nobody had told her which note he intended to discuss. Nobody had identified a document. Nobody had mentioned dates. Yet she already knew. The mediator noticed. Daniel noticed. And Olivia knew they noticed. The third crack, the largest one yet, tiny in appearance, massive in consequence. She answered eventually, but the answer arrived late. Too late. The timing had already spoken. Then, something happened Ethan hadn't expected. Olivia became angry. Not openly. Not explosively. Just enough. The mask slipped. A fraction. I spent years trying to make things work. There was frustration now. Real frustration. Not performed. I carried that marriage by myself. The mediator shifted. Daniel finally looked up. Ethan remained calm, because he recognized something important. For months he had been fighting the story. Now the story was fighting back. And stories become careless when cornered. Olivia leaned forward. You always needed everyone to think you were the good guy. The sentence escaped before she could stop it. Immediately the room changed. Because suddenly this wasn't about fear, or healing, or peace. It was about image, control, narrative, ownership. Olivia realized it too late. The silence that followed belonged to her, not him. Ethan studied the woman across the table. The woman he once loved. The woman he once apologized to before understanding the argument. The woman who had spent months defining him. Then he said the only thing that truly mattered. Not for the mediator, not for the attorneys. For himself. You were allowed to leave. The words landed softly. But you weren't allowed to decide who I was after you did. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Because the sentence carried everything. The marriage. The lies. The silence. The survival. The room remained still. And for the first time since this began, Ethan wasn't defending himself. He was simply telling the truth. The story no longer belonged to Olivia alone. 3 months later, the flash drive lived in a kitchen drawer, not on a desk, not beside the laptop, not in Ethan's pocket, a drawer between takeout menus and spare batteries. Exactly where it belonged. The legal process wasn't entirely finished. A few signatures remained. A few financial details still needed attention. Life rarely wraps itself up as neatly as stories do. But the worst of it was over. The reviews ended. The client eventually returned. A few friendships didn't. That part still hurt. Some people apologized. Most didn't. Ethan learned to live with both. The city outside his apartment looked different now. Not because Chicago had changed, because he had. On a cool Saturday morning, he stood in the kitchen making coffee. The same black coffee, the same mug, the same routine. The difference was smaller than people imagine healing to be. Healing wasn't fireworks. It wasn't transformation. Sometimes it was simply making coffee without replaying old arguments. His phone buzzed. A text from Mason. Mom wants to know if you're coming to dinner. Ethan smiled. Another followed immediately. She also wants to know if you're finally eating vegetables. Some things never change. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji. The response arrived instantly. Coward. The smile stayed for several minutes. Small moments. Ordinary moments. Those had become important again. The knock at the door came shortly after noon. He already knew who it would be. Rachel never texted when she was less than a block away. A habit, one of many. She stood outside holding 2 coffees. One black, one with cream. No explanation necessary. You know there's a coffee maker inside. Your coffee tastes like regret. That's unfair. It really isn't. Rachel stepped inside. The apartment felt different from the first night she had brought groceries. The stacks of documents were gone. The boxes were gone. The air no longer felt crowded by unfinished battles. A second chair now sat near the living room window, not because Ethan expected company, because eventually he stopped arranging the apartment around absence. Rachel handed him the black coffee, then noticed the kitchen drawer sitting slightly open. The silver flash drive was visible inside. Neither of them mentioned it immediately. That too mattered. For months, the flash drive had controlled every conversation. Now it was just another object. Important, but no longer in charge. Rachel pointed toward it. You kept it. Ethan followed her gaze. Yeah, you should probably throw it away. Probably. Neither moved. The drive remained exactly where it was. Not treasured. Not displayed. Not forgotten. Just present. Like certain scars. Rachel settled into the chair near the window. Sunlight filtered through the glass. The city stretched beyond it. Cars. People. Movement. Life. The normal things that continue, whether hearts break or not. For a while, they talked about nothing important. A restaurant that closed. A terrible movie Rachel hated. A mutual friend who had accidentally sent a group text to the wrong people. Simple conversations. The kind that become possible after survival. Eventually, a quiet moment settled between them. Not awkward. Comfortable. Different. Rachel turned her coffee cup slowly. You still flinch. Ethan frowned. What? When your phone buzzes? The observation surprised him. Then, it didn't. Rachel noticed things. Always had. Ethan glanced at the phone resting beside him. She was right. The habit remained. Months of bad news had trained his body before his mind could catch up. Some wounds leave through the front door. Others forget to. I guess I do. Rachel nodded. No judgment. No therapy language. No attempt to fix him. Just acknowledgement. Accepted. Not erased. The phrase drifted through his thoughts. That was the truth of it. The damage wasn't gone. The healing was simply larger than the damage now. A siren echoed somewhere downtown. A familiar sound. For a second, Ethan remembered another afternoon. Another office. Another conference table. A silver flash drive resting beside divorce papers. The memory still carried weight. Just not enough to crush him. Rachel watched him carefully. What? He shook his head. Nothing. A small smile appeared. That's usually a lie. Sometimes. Most times. She wasn't wrong. The smile remained between them. Gentle. Unforced. Nobody reached for the other's hand. Nobody made grand declarations. Nobody tried to transform survival into a fairy tale. Because that wasn't what this was. Love, if it was becoming love, looked quieter than that. Less dramatic. More honest. Built from choices. From boundaries. From truth. From two people who had both made mistakes and decided not to hide from them. The afternoon sunlight shifted slowly across the floor. Eventually, Rachel stood. She had somewhere to be. Life continued. That was the point. At the door, she paused, the same way she had paused so many times before. Then she nodded toward the kitchen drawer. You know, one day, you'll stop checking whether it's still there. Ethan considered that. Maybe she was right. Maybe she wasn't. Either way, he wasn't in a hurry. The flash drive would remain for now. Not because he needed proof anymore, because healing doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it arrives drawer by drawer, step by step, choice by choice. Rachel smiled once before leaving. The door closed softly behind her. The apartment settled into quiet, not loneliness, just quiet. Ethan crossed the kitchen, opened the drawer. The flash drive rested exactly where he had left it, a small silver object. Once it had been the only thing standing between him and a lie. Now it was simply a reminder. He closed the drawer, then walked away, and that, more than anything else, felt like progress. Some people do not destroy you by shouting. They do it by writing a version of you that everyone else can believe. And sometimes, the person who saves you is not the person who fixes your life. It is the person who finally says, "No, that is not what happened." If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments, have you ever had to fight for the truth of your own life? And if you want more stories like this, leave a like, subscribe,